Limelight is a 1981 song by Canadian power trio Rush, one of the most popular songs on their most popular album, Moving Pictures. It's the shortest song on the album, one of the shortest songs they ever recorded, a lean 4 minutes, 20 seconds, in the bottom 10th percentile of all their song lengths. It's really, really good, but it's also really, really weird. How it came to be both inspired me to start this channel. I've been a Rush fan as long as I've played guitar, over 35 years now. I've produced 5 albums, 3 of which I engineered and 2 of which I co-wrote or wrote all the songs on. For me, bass and guitar are tools to write songs with, as songwriting is my primary musical interest, specifically the intersection of melody, rhythm, lyrics, chords, and structure. So Limelight is a masterclass in arrangement. It's full of little flourishes and tweaks that operate against the inherent boredom that comes with pop song repetition. How do you keep a song interesting when it only has 3 parts and basically 5 chords, like Limelight? It's astonishing how odd the material is, considering the song was a huge hit. I mean, huge. It's the second single on their best-selling record. It went to number 4 in the US Billboard Top Tracks, 55 in the Hot 100, and the band played it basically their entire career. A 2015 Rolling Stone Readers poll put it as the number 3 Rush song of all time, behind 2112 and Tom Sawyer. A note about the sheet music I'm using here. This comes from a book I bought in the 90s, and it is really bad. It is really inaccurate. If you pause or squint or whatever, I've had to handwrite corrections all over it. The chords are notated incorrectly. The time signatures are questionable. It's pretty much universally true that none of the transcriptions online get this quite right. The only thing you should trust is Alex himself. That's why I've gone to the source.
Hi, I'm Alex Lifeson of Rush.
I'm using the sheet music here entirely for structural reasons, just to give the lay of the land. By the way, please don't mind my dogs making noise in the background. They're good boys, and they're also big Rush heads. And just a heads up before we dive in, I won't be explaining music theory. Plenty of channels do that. We'll be focusing on the songwriting, arrangement, and structure. We're just going to assume you know the terms power chord, sus4, arpeggio, time signature, staccato, legato, 1-4-5, etc. We're not analyzing harmony here either. We're looking at the decisions songwriters have to make when trying to sculpt challenging musical material into something catchy and accessible. Keyword is choices. Musical forensics. This will have 3 chapters, looking at the quirks of the final arrangement, then how they ended up with this mini masterpiece we all know and love. And finally, what if scenarios and roads not taken. I'll be throwing shoutouts to my favorite YouTube music analysts throughout, starting right now with 12-tone, because we're about to take this thing apart. The intro begins with a walk-up. Single note, guitar, low E to middle E, skipping the 5th, and then a B5 to an A5. The walk-up is kind of a pentatonic, but it skips the B, only to fall back into it with the first chord. Basically, Lifeson has made a hole, and then he fills the hole with a big fat power chord of the missing note. It's very cool. The A5 and B5 sketch out the rhythmic accents of the riff to come, notably the stress on the and of 4. It's essentially a deconstructed version of the main riff. Notice that the drums come in sort of between the notes of the riff. Boom. Kind of like an intentional oopsie. In the bar before the riff, the drums play this wildly staccato pattern as if they're trying to keep up with it or something. It's a very fun, almost tongue-in-cheek. The last big hit they had was Spirit of Radio, which has this incredibly tight, simultaneous playing. Now they're intentionally playing off beats with each other, playing the gaps in each other's parts, the drums and the guitar here. It's like an engine turning over until it catches, and then suddenly we're off to the races. So once that full band comes in, the call and response, interestingly, reverses itself, implying it's now chords, then notes. It flops the expectation, so it adds a little bit of interest without changing anything. The intro starts before the first bar and sets up this reversal. And the riff notes are different now. Everything's been adjusted slightly. The 6-string E5 chord is added, hitting the same spot in the rhythm where the A5 used to be, except the E is ringing and not staccato. The implied 5-4-1 of the intro is now made explicit. Lifeson also holds a B note through every chord.
So then it's the B, A, and see, I keep this B string ringing on the G throughout the whole thing.
The B note is already in the B5 and E5, but it turns the A5 into an A sus2 inversion. This chord-shaped stacked fifths is a favorite of Andy Summers of The Police. Under this, Geddy is arpeggiating the chords, following the same rhythmic accent pattern, but he doesn't add a B to the A, he plays an A, creating this fleeting whole-step rub with the guitar. Don't worry, they're saving the really spicy rub for later. The walk-up also morphs, both the high and low E's are missing now, In fact, all of the E's are missing. It starts on F sharp and it ends on A. It's basically sketching an F sharp minor arpeggio. So it's a different tonality, probably because there's that 6-string E5. You don't really want to follow an E5 with some more E riffs. It would be a little too samey. But everyone does the walk-up in unison. So there's this nice separation as the bass arpeggiates, the guitar does chords, and they play the walk-up. Big call and response feel. It's really the hook of the song. Big 7/4 radio-friendly hook. If you ever looked at the sheet music, you'll notice Limelight is notated in B major most of the time. I've been saying 5/4/1, not 1 flat 7/4. The more I looked at it, the intro and riff just feel like E to me, not B. B is absolutely true of the verses and chorus. But the A here doesn't fit B major. B major has an A sharp. You could say it's E mixolydian, but that's still a change. The point is there's a harmonic difference in vibe between the riff and the stanzas and the choruses. The riff works as a nice sorbet-like effect, so your ear is just not stuck in that B major mode for so long. It's a subtle thing. It's done a lot of blues-based rock, which often have one toe in an adjacent key. Adam Neely has a whole video on what key is Sweet Home Alabama in. So that's just one example. We're not going to be super mathy on this channel, but a note about time signatures here. 7/4 is compound time, being the sum of two basic meters, 4/4 and 3/4. It's basically the longest single time signature unit you're likely to see in sort of any kind of mainstream song. Longer patterns like 9/4 are really better divided on the page into like 5 and 4 or whatever. 7/4 is common enough to be its own thing, thus easier to like sort of sight read. And being an odd number, though, it challenges drummers to find a smooth way to play a backbeat through it. You can put a kick on 7, giving you 2 kicks in a row, or a snare on 7, giving 2 snares in a row. Or you can get real tricky and put the snare on 1 and 2, mildly displacing the double up. So what does Neil Peart do here? He does every single one of these. Every rep of this riff, 4 reps, he plays a different way of getting from the 7 to the 1, including the deviously brilliant trick of playing the snare on 6, 7, 1, and 2, 4 snares in a row, implying like a 4/4 passage in the middle of the 2 7s, even though no other instruments are doing any such thing. It makes me giddy. It's so fun. So the verses are interesting on several levels. The first is that they're divided into 5 sets of 6-beat phrases, the last line being truncated. First line is 2 bars of 3/4 waltz time, followed by 2 bars of 4 + 2 straight time. So the change from 3s to 4s, or shall we say triplet to duplet meter, is marked by 2 staccato beats on the 1 and 2. It's kind of a rhythmic motif that exactly matches the melody. It's so satisfying. The change from the lilt of the waltzy vibe into the sudden tension and release of those 2 first notes into the straight time is just one of those $1 million arrangement flourishes. It adds energy and pizzazz without being bombastic. It creates space. Space is not something Rush was known for in this era. In fact, throughout the stanzas, the band sits out quite a bit relative to what Rush usually does. Big progress that they're letting the melody stand first and foremost. It's just great dynamics. Interesting to note that most of the chords here are power chords, which are a staple of the ascendant punk and metal scenes in 1981, but until this point in their career, Rush had really rarely ever used them. They had been very into the minor and major triads at first, and then throughout the 70s, as the prog influence took over, they got more ambiguous voicings like the big Genesis chords and susses, and suddenly there's now power chords in the toolkit. The verse melody is based around the 3rds and 5ths of the chords, which gives it a wistful, less emphatic energy, thoughtful. The first chord is a B5, and Geddy's singing the 3rd, so between the vocals, guitar, and bass, we have a full B major chord. Geddy then goes up a half step to the E right as Alex meets him there by hitting the high E string. The notes coming together is just a beautiful way of like underscoring the melody. Second chord is very often notated as a G-sharp 5, but it's actually a G-sharp sus 4/7 here.
And then that's the second chord.
But he's only playing the low 3 strings, so it's actually a 1/5 power chord with a 7 on top. It's subtle. It's not that clear on the studio recording, but it is very clear in some of the live recordings. And then the final part of the riff is the F sharp to E when it gets to the straight time. We've done 2 bars of 3/4, 2 bars of 6/4, and now we're back to 2 bars of 3/4. Aha, the waltz again. We must be starting another stanza. And then it just ends abruptly on a bar of 4/4. Just aborts the whole pattern just when you've gotten used to it. And in comes the riff. And interestingly here, the riff doesn't begin on 1. It begins on the end of 4, the exact moment of the final line of lyric of the stanza. This is clearly done to emphasize the lyrics again. So we have a variation on the riff, variation number 2. Lifeson is now doubling the bass He's arpeggiating. And then the second bar of the riff, it comes in on 1, but he's still arpeggiating. So that's actually a third variation. It's very elegant and effective. Verse 2 is musically identical to verse 1, but it ends with a single rep of the riff, which includes a variation of the walk-up, giving us our fourth version. He adds this variation whenever the riff is before a chorus.
And then you slide back up.
So the chorus. The chorus is where things really get interesting. There's so many things to talk about. The first is the arpeggios. The chord here is a G sharp sus4 7. That chord is, you can't copyright chords. Adam Neely has a whole video on that too. But if there's a signature chord for Andy Summers of the Police, it's the sus4 7. It's all over the Police's music. It's the Walking on the Moon chord and so many other songs. It's a bit of a jazz chord. It's very, well, suspended is literally and emotionally the right word. It's a chord of unresolved emotion. What Lifeson does here is he arpeggiates it and then adds the third, making it clear this is a minor chord because you can't really tell the sus.
And then you slide back up to that second chord, but instead of playing it barred, now you lift off the bar and just hold it down on those first bottom 3 strings, and then you play an arpeggio open. So it's...
And as he goes through the chords, the 3 chords here, you'll see that open B string is just ringing throughout no matter what he's playing under it.
With the strings ringing out.
That's something Lifeson loves to do. It's pedal tone, I guess you could call it. It's almost an ostinato. Funny, too, that it's the same single note that he was playing in the riff. Just there's a lot of B ringing thing going on in the song. It's lovely. It's weird. But there's a couple things to note here. The final note of each measure is really a pickup note to the following bar. So that C sharp belongs with the following E5, just as the A sharp at the end of the E5 really belongs with the F sharp. It's sort of anticipating the next chord, and so the phrasing crosses the bar line. That gives us a rolling forward kind of motion. After the Andy Summers chord, he goes down to the E5, the same one we heard in the riff, this time also arpeggiated, and then the F sharp
he plays
next is pretty funny to me because this is actually Alex Lifeson's signature chord, the so-called hemispheres chord. It's a F sharp major with the high B open and the high E, except we don't really hear the high E yet. That comes later. He's basically snuck in the Andy Summers signature chord and his own signature chord. Sort of legendary in songwriting circles. The Lifeson chord is really interesting to me because it shouldn't work here. It's really dissonant. It has both an A sharp and a B natural, both ringing open. The most dissonant interval in Western music, the dreaded flat second. They're both in the scale, funnily enough. In this case, the third and fourth of the chord being played simultaneously. But it's amazing that this rub doesn't derail the whole thing. It's just a grinding kind of sound, but something about the arpeggios disguise it. It just slips right through, and it adds a little bit of uneasiness to it. Sonic color, really. It's a lovely thing. Lifeson is nothing if not super creative. The mood of the song is ambivalent and kind of introspective, and this suits it. The dissonance sort of represents the passing pain of these arpeggios. The second half of the chorus, the 4/4 section, it's the joy of performing, the arts for art's sake ethos. The other thing to note here is that this is a 3-chord pattern with 1 chord per bar. So it's the same 3 chords over and over again, but it's not a 3-chord melody, basically a 2-chord melody. Every line is 2 chords. You can see how it lays out there. But then you also look at the bar count and you're like, wait a minute. There's 7 bars of 3/4 here across 3 lines. There's this extra bar at the end for a 21 beat pattern, which doesn't make any sense and doesn't really line up with 4s or 6s or even 2s. You'd think the 4/4 would come in at the first of the pattern, but it comes in on the second of the pattern, which is the E5. It's not like it starts over again. The loop, the 3-chord loop, continues across this new time signature change. Not just a time signature change, it's like a whole new energy change. Ambivalent and introspective into this like celebration thing. But the loop never stops. It's almost like a macro level simultaneous time signature experiment of some kind. It's fascinating. You can stand back and look at it. If you prioritize the lyrics, it looks like this. But if you look at the harmonic rhythm, it looks like this. How weird is a 3-bar loop? I've never seen one ever in any piece of music in any genre. And then to put a 2-bar melodic pattern on top of it so that every line of lyric begins on a different chord, it's just a truly unhinged musical structure. Lifeson is now strumming all 3 chords, letting the E string ring free over the E and F sharp and barring the G sharp chord, which removes the minor third in favor of the sus4. The melancholy is now at bay. Geddy plays roots, as he does in most of the song, possibly the most minimal bass performance of his career.
Yes, but sometimes people love crap.
It just sounds fantastic. The melody is great. Everything is like lining up. But then when you actually learn how to play this, you realize, no, nothing's lining up at all. It's like completely not. Let's look at the poetics of this chorus. The rhyme scheme is a little unusual. A, B, 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 C, C, B form, with the final basically being half lines. Living in the limelight doesn't actually rhyme with anything, and yet everything else rhymes with something. The secret sauce here is the final line. Is actually two established rhymes. By doing that, you tie together first half and the second half. Ending with another Asian line would be quite a bit less satisfying. And it just so happens that it lands on the final chord of the cycle so that we can exit with the 3/4 arpeggios again. Little reminder of the uneasiness that preceded the joy. An odd 9-beat transition, and then we've got a riff again. It starts as we expect, and then suddenly they all play simultaneous, staccato. It snaps your whole interest right back into what's about to happen. It's a simple thing that costs nothing, takes no extra time, and adds a ton because of that refreshing quality. With all the riff variations, the structure is less this than, in fact, this. A lot of mixing and matching of the riffs here. Verse 3, exactly like verse 1, but for the lyrics. Verse 4, on the other hand, has a melody variation. Geddy goes high. All the world's indeed a stage, from Shakespeare. Looking at the lyrics, it's an odd line to emphasize, but I think this stanza is Neil's way of saying this is a universal experience more than you might think. This isn't like some rich rock star complaining about his amazing life. We're all performing for each other. And if you relate to the uneasiness of that in daily life, imagine me on the throne back here having to experience this like 50-fold. Geddy going high here signifies this is a new and more powerful thought, despite the quote being a general statement. Each another's audience, a nod to multiple subjectivity that Peart would revisit again and again over the course of his long and amazing career. Funny to me that the song is not in first person because it is so personal. I mean, Rush had written sort of personal things in the past. On the last record, there's 2 relationship songs, Different Strings and Entre Nous, but they're written in generality. They do contain some first person lines, but they're very abstract. Here, this is strictly autobiographical, and yet he does not use first person. He writes in basically third person neutral. One must put up barriers to keep oneself intact, not I must put up barriers to keep myself intact, which I think would have worked, and maybe even a little better in terms of just lyricality, the musicalness of the words. It's a pretty formal way to write for something so heartfelt. If he had written this 3 albums later, I think it would have been in first person, but he was just starting to move into a more personal direction with his lyrics. So the final verse ends with the same riff variations, and then we're going into chorus 2. Chorus 2 is exactly the same as the first chorus, but it does not end with 3 arpeggios. It ends with what Rush called a flying brick, inner band shorthand for the whole band pounding eighth notes for a transition. You can hear flying bricks when the guitar goes electric at the beginning of The Tree and in The Spirit of Radio between sections. Here they do a flying brick into a complete stop, a brick wall, so to speak, and then Lifeson takes it away into his solo. His big showcase, his favorite, and it's a now for something completely different moment. But when you look at the bass is playing the roots of the chorus, adding a 4th bar of G sharp. So now instead of a 3-bar rep, it's a 4-bar rep, G sharp to E to F sharp to G sharp. The drums and bass are slowed down, implying sort of a 12/8 feel. And Neil and Geddy are treating the waltz time as 12/8 as Lifeson solos, and they gradually speed up. Peart pushes the groove into 3/4 and starts unleashing all these drum fills, and then the wildest thing happens. It's my favorite part of the song. Peart starts playing in 4/4, and Geddy starts to play something really familiar. Geddy stops playing in sets of 4, and he reverts back to playing in sets of 3, because he's now playing the bass part of the first half of the chorus. If you're looping 3 bars, that's 9-beat reps. It's not divisible by 2. Peart has to start playing backwards to the beat. So what he does is he plays 4/4 for 3 bars, because 4 across 3 is the same as 3 across 4, and then starts playing a bar early in 4/4 right before Geddy starts looping the 3. So what he's doing is he's anticipating coming in on the 1 of the chorus, but he's doing it like a lot of bars early. Lifeson finishes the solo, hits that high sustained note, he starts arpeggiating. You think, okay, we're going into the 3/4 of the chorus again. but Peart never stops. Peart drives the whole thing straight through the waltz part of the chorus in 4/4 because it's a 21 beat section. He then has to do a bar-long fill in that mysterious 7th bar so that they can all end properly into the 4/4 section. It's super, super exciting and clever. You know, he has a big choice to make. There's an odd number of beats before the chorus hits and an odd number of beats in the chorus. He could have played straight through and put the snare on the 1 of the first bar of the chorus. It's a little too weird. More thoughts on that later. I also think it's interesting that the double chorus, which ends this classic structure, it's kind of there but not there. Because the solo is chorus. It's all the same chords, and it's basically the same harmonic rhythm, but it doesn't feel like a chorus until the chorus comes in. At the point of the chorus coming in, we've been hearing basically the same 3 chords for 2 minutes or something crazy. Finally, you can see how much real estate this chorus really takes up. It's enormous. We are looping G sharp, E, and F sharp for the entire second half of the song without break. It's great. It's wild. By the way, you never hear the riff again. Riff is in the rear view. So we're just cycling through the chords. It's never boring. They're constant rhythmic and energy changes. They do the chorus one last time. Geddy repeats the final line, and then they're rocking out again across all the same chords. Guitar does some embellishments. He's playing the F sharp and the E as major triads now. He's playing them high on the neck. Basically, the first uncomplicated major triads of the entire song. It's the first chord that's not a suspension or a power chord or some kind of stacked jazz chord. They only show up in the final, 10 seconds of the song. It's just a great ride out. It's awesome. As the song ends on the big G sharp sus4/7, Geddy plays something really interesting. It's basically free time instead of a standard arpeggio or something. Well, the first 3 notes are stacked fifths with classic Andy Summers, and he starts fooling around in that F sharp space. He pulls the chord back to the preceding chord, and there's melancholy. It's a nod to the cyclical nature of this emotion. He's never going to completely resolve it. It's always going to be there, as fun as the fun can be. Well, we all know Neil Peart literally ran off the stage down the tunnel and out at the end of every show. So it's a very cool musical gesture, very similar, in fact, to the 9-beat arpeggio figure that ends the first chorus. Yes, this was fun, but now the unfun stuff will begin again. And Geddy does it in 6 notes, and they're out of there, baby.